evening. This is Atheist History Week, and I'm John Rafferty. I'm the president of the Secular Humanist Society of New York, and I'm also a proud and active member of New York City Atheists, which produces this show. Atheist History Week, each week at this time, looks at the week's anniversaries in the history of free thought. Free thought embraces atheism, agnosticism, secularism, humanism, skepticism, rationalism, whatever you have-ism. We discuss notable people, the famous, the not-so-famous, sometimes the infamous, who were born or died or achieved something significant in regards free thought during this calendar week. And we look at significant events that took place this week in history: court cases, publishing dates, religious riots, burnings at the stake, and other faith-based fun and games. We have a busy week this week. We got a lot of people to talk about and things to talk about. Let's start the evening with not a person, but the 14th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, which was ratified on July 28th in 1868. It took a civil war and the death of 600,000 American men to get to the point where we could have a 14th, 15th, and 16th Amendment. But it finally came to pass in 1868, and it reads in part, "No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws." Gradually applied by the Supreme Court, has incorporated the Bill of Rights and constitutional rights, including the right to be free from state-fostered religion, to citizens of all states. This may seem obvious and even simplistic to us today, but many states, up until the 14th Amendment, denied some people, most famously on the basis of the color of their skin, the rights of to which all U.S. citizens are entitled. And by the way, not just slaves, but even U.S. citizens who were African American. They even claimed that the First Amendment did not apply to the states, and that they could, the state of Maryland could prohibit Jews from serving in the government, or other southern states could insist upon oaths sworn upon the Bible. They said, doesn't apply. That's a federal law. It doesn't apply to the states. A doctrine called nullification. And it took the 14th Amendment to overturn it. And then it took 100 years of enforcing the 14th Amendment against the recalcitrant states. And there are people today in some of the states, not New York, I gotta say, or New Jersey or Connecticut, who insist also that the states have the perfect right to discriminate against anybody they want to, ignoring the 14th Amendment. However, it's on the books, and it gets stronger with every passing year. We've got right now the most conservative Supreme Court we've had since the early 30s, which is probably the most conservative Supreme Court ever. We have a tremendously conservative Supreme Court now, and not one of those justices would think of overturning the 14th Amendment. Yet they can't anyway, but okay. Also in American history, on July 28th in 1637, Anne Hutchinson was booted out of the Massachusetts colony. Now, this is This Week in Atheism, and Anne Hutchinson was no atheist. As a matter of fact, today we would consider her a religious wacko. She would make the most right-wing Christian fundamentalist today look like a liberal, okay? looked like an agnostic. However, she had a sense of justice. She had a sense of fair play, and she had a sense of her own worth and the worth of individuals. Anne Hutchinson taught her own Bible classes and religious ideas to a small circle of friends that gradually grew bigger and bigger in Massachusetts. And the Massachusetts General Court finally brought her to trial for sedition and heresy. Heresy, obviously, because of diverging from the official religious, and in sedition because church and state were locked together. If you're arguing against the official meaning of the Bible, that's sedition, that's treason. Okay? Pretty good argument for the separation of church and state right there. The Massachusetts General Court and its governor, and the Governor Winthrop, just were determined finally to get rid of this woman. They brought her to trial. Big mistake. They should have just run her out of town, because at the trial she humiliated them. Every single argument they brought against her, she just overwhelmed them. Because, for one thing, she knew her Bible backwards and forwards, and she was able to quote chapter and verse to them in support of her own ideas. Nevertheless, Governor Winthrop, who was absolutely bananas because she was winning every point, simply ordered her banished. "I desire to know wherefore I am banished," she asked. "Say no more," Winthrop answered. "The court knows wherefore and is satisfied." Which reminds me of the great line from a Ring Lardner short story. "Shut up," he explained. Okay. So why do we bring this up? One religious nut being banished by a bunch of religious nuts. Because Anne Hutchinson moved to Rhode Island. Her husband and a couple of her sons had already moved there and set up a colony of their own, just as Roger Williams more famously had in Rhode Island as well. And by the way, let me skip forward in her life story. Governor Winthrop, who was still seething about her heresy, might have made a move to go into Rhode Island with some, heavies and bring her back to burn her at the stake or something. Anne Hutchinson moved to New York by the shores of a river which now bears her name, the Hutchinson River, and next to which a modern highway runs called the Hutchinson River Parkway. A beautiful parkway, named for her, and one of the reasons that both are named for her is because that she and several of her children died there in an Indian raid. But at any rate, let's go back there to that founding of the colony that her husband and her sons technically founded, because this was 1638 and no woman could found the colony. How could she? They're not allowed to sign their names to a document. But here's what the compact drawn up by the men of Anne Hutchinson's family and their larger family of relatives and friends and everything else. Here's what they wrote about their new colony. "No person within said colony at any time hereafter shall in any wise be molested, punished, disquieted, or called into question on matters of religion, so long as he keeps the peace." 1638, when the whole of Western civilization was burning people at the stake, hanging them, drawing and quartering them because of minuscule differences in religious doctrine, even terminology, what you called something. Anne Hutchinson and her husband and her sons founded a colony that just simply said everybody can worship any way they please, or by implication, not worship, and we'll leave them alone. As long as they keep the peace, anybody can be anything they want, which in those days would have included Jews, Mohammedans, you name it. Anyway, Anne Hutchinson banished from Massachusetts on July 28, 1637. On July 26th in 1817, a real atheist, abolitionist, infidel, Lucy Coleman, who was born, Danforth, was born in New England. She was a descendant, and here's a little hook to the previous one, she was a descendant of John and Priscilla Alden. You remember, speak for yourself, John and Priscilla Alden. Lucy was twice widowed, and when her second husband was killed in an accident, she was left to support her 7-year-old daughter, and she couldn't find work because she was a woman. And she discovered what she called woman's wrongs rather than rights. She wrote, "I have given up the church more because of its complicity with slavery than from a full understanding of the foolishness of its creeds." What she saw was that the whole system didn't work, and when she looked at it, she hated it. She also became a follower of Susan B. Anthony. She finally got some work as a teacher, and then caused a huge stink because she lectured and wrote for the abolition of corporal punishment in the schools. This was revolutionary, outrageous. We can't beat the children? What nonsense. At any rate, she also became an abolitionist lecturer, and as she said, she was often mobbed when she spoke out against slavery, and she found that the racist ringleaders who were inciting the mobs, and right there with the mobs, were nearly always clergymen. She wrote regular columns for The Truth Seeker, the leading Freeport publication of its time. And in one of her columns she wrote, "If your Bible is an argument for the degradation of women and the abusive whipping of little children, I advise you to put it away and use your common sense instead." Roughly the same lifetime, on July 23rd, Samuel Porter Putnam was born in 1838, the son of a Congregationalist minister. He served as a private in the Civil War and rose to the rank of captain. Must have been some guy. He became a Congregationalist minister like his father, and but about 3 years after becoming a minister of the Congregationalists, he broke with them and became a Unitarian. He served in various Unitarian congregations. I guess what he was trying to do was save the idea of religion in his head, and after 3 more years he said, "I give up," and he gave up religion entirely, or at least Christian religion, and he became an open and avowed free thinker. As he recorded in his magnum opus, 400 Years of Free Thought. He was president of the American Secular Union in the late 19th century, and he lectured and traveled all over America and in Canada to promote free thought and rationalism in America. Unfortunately, I'm going to read from the Freedom from Religion Foundation biography of Putnam. Putnam's tragic death created a mild scandal. He and a young lecturer colleague, May Collins, had been touring in Boston. She was staying at the home of Josephine Tilton. The pair, that is, Putnam and young May Collins, had returned to the house after dinner and were found dead the next morning in her room. victims of leaking gas. Although they were fully clothed and there was, quote, no evidence of impropriety, unquote, the religious press attacked Putnam, no kidding, disclosing that he was a divorced man with 2 children. I suppose at this point I'm supposed to say, well, there was no need to think that he was getting it on with a young woman. Why not? I hope he was. I hope the last night was a good one for both of them. In My Religious Experience in 1891, he wrote, "The last superstition of the human mind is the superstition that religion in itself is a good thing, though it might be free from dogma. I believe, however, that the religious feeling, as feeling, is wrong, and the civilized man will have nothing to do with it. When the shadow of religion is disappeared forever, I felt I was free from a disease." Let's look at a few contemporary people, going over their contributions very quickly. On July 25th in 1902, the longshoreman philosopher was born, Eric Hoffer. By age 5, he was reading in both English and German, and then at the age of 7, he was struck by an unexplained blindness. He was blind until at the age of 15, again, for no discernible reason, his sight came back. But the experience of being blind turned him into a non-stop inveterate reader. He was working as a migrant in California. He spent most of his time as a dock worker, which got him that title, the longshoreman philosopher. And why? If you don't recognize the name Eric Hoffer, you recognize the phrase, the true believer. And that was the name of his classic of 1951. He published 9 other books in his lifetime, but The True Believer really made a difference in American thought for the second half of the 20th century. Here's what a true believer is, says Eric Hoffer. The facts on which the true believer bases his conclusions must not be derived from his experience or observation, but from Holy Writ. To rely on the evidence of the senses and of reason is heresy and treason. Now, by the way, when he wrote this, he wasn't just talking, when he meant Holy Writ, it was not just the Bible or the Quran he was talking about, he was also talking about Marx and anybody else who laid down, this is the truth for now and forever. The effect thus, he wrote, the effectiveness of a doctrine should not be judged by its profundity, sublimity, or the value, or the validity of the truths it embodies, but by how thoroughly it insulates the individual from his self and the world as it is. What Pascal said of an effective religion is true of any effective doctrine. It must be contrary to nature, to common sense, and to pleasure. Eric Hoffer, in The True Believer, 1951. I used to work with a man who told me that when he was in high school in the 40s, the amateur photographer and writer at that school in the Bronx got the nickname The Dummy. The Dummy was Stanley Kubrick. Who was born July 26th in 1928 in the Bronx. He sold his first photograph at the age of 16 to Look magazine and was working on the magazine staff a year later. Eventually, of course, we know him for movies like The Killing, Spartacus, Lolita, Dr. Strangelove, 2001: A Space Odyssey, A Clockwork Orange, so many. Kubrick was an atheist, and his work is never to be forgotten. wonderful stuff. The Secular Human Society just did a movie night where we did Dr. Strangelove, showed Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb, and a number of our younger people in the audience had not seen it and laughed themselves sick. But, said Stanley Kubrick in an interview in 1963, the whole idea of God is absurd. If anything, 2001, his movie, shows that what some people call God is simply an acceptable term for their ignorance. What they don't understand, they call God. I chose to do Dr. Clark, meaning Arthur Clarke, his story, The Sentinel, which became 2001. I chose to do Dr. Clarke's story as a film because it highlights a critical factor necessary for human evolution, that is, beyond our present condition. This film is a rejection of the notion that there is a God. Isn't that obvious? It is. On July 26, 1894, Aldous Huxley was born, the grandson of Thomas Henry Huxley and brother of Aldous Huxley, in England, in Surrey, one of the most famous intellectual families in England. Interestingly enough, like Hoffer, he was blind for a short period, for about a year and a half of an eye disease, but he regained his vision and became a successful novelist and a poet as well. One of the first grown-up novels I ever read was Chrome Yellow, which he published in 1921. No, I did not read the original edition. And he also worked as of course, probably his most famous book is Brave New World, about a society in which every facet of human existence is controlled, and babies are born in laboratories, and emotion is pretty well drummed out of the human race, and we're all miserable. But said he, towards the end of his life, as a matter of fact, very close to the end of his life, he wrote, "It's a bit embarrassing to have been concerned with the human problem all one's life and find at the end that one has no more to offer by way of advice than try to be a little kinder." If we must play the theological game, he wrote, let us never forget that it is a game. Religion, it seems to me, can only survive only as a consciously accepted system of make-believe. You never see animals going through the absurd and often horrible fooleries of magic and religion. Asses do not bray a liturgy to cloudless skies, nor do cats attempt, by abstinence from cat's meat, to wheedle the feline spirits into benevolence. Only man behaves with such gratuitous folly. It is the price he has to pay for being intelligent, but not, as yet, quite intelligent enough. Aldous Huxley, born July 26, 1894. Paul Boyer, Paul D. Boyer, to give him his full title, Nobel laureate Paul D. Boyer, was born in Provo, Utah on July 31st in 1918. And Utah, guess what? Mormon. He became a deacon in the Mormon church at the age of 12 and graduated from Brigham Young University, where he met his wife, Lyda. But doing his graduate work in science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, as the biography points out, altered his perspective. He gradually dropped his Mormon membership, and he pointed out that a belief in God and in a hereafter dropped considerably as the level of scientific achievement increased. He shared the Nobel Prize in Chemistry in 1997 with John Waller and Janice Gow for their, ready for this, elucidation of the enzymatic mechanism underlying the synthesis of adenosine triphosphate. I bet you.
Where we once were, we are no longer a Christian nation, at least not just. We are also a Jewish nation, and a Muslim nation, and a Buddhist nation, and a Hindu nation, and a nation of non-believers.